It began with a single moment I can never forget. A room full of familiar faces, the dull clinking of glasses, and laughter that wasn't mine. I remember standing there, my palms clammy, my heart stumbling against my ribs, and then her laughter, sharp, humiliating, and louder than everything else around me. My wife, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was laughing at me in front of everyone. That sound cut deeper than any insult ever could. I didn't know it then, but that laugh would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself. I grew up in a small town where reputation mattered. My father taught me to work hard, to carry myself with dignity, and to never let anyone see weakness. For years, I believed those lessons had armored me against the world. I carried them into my career, my friendships, and most of all, my marriage. When I met her, she felt like a spark in an otherwise predictable life. She was radiant, magnetic. Someone who could light up a room just by walking into it. I thought her laughter was music back then. I thought it meant joy, connection, love. I never imagined it could one day feel like a weapon. Our early years together were simple but full of warmth. We built our life piece by piece, a modest house, steady jobs, shared dreams of building something lasting. She had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, and I loved her for it. But looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before I dared to acknowledge them. She loved the spotlight more than stability, attention more than affection. And slowly, I became less of a partner and more of a background character in her stage. At first, it was subtle, the way she teased me in front of friends, brushing off my opinions like they were silly, harmless jabs disguised as jokes. I laughed along, convincing myself it was just playfulness. But inside, something tightened. Every remark carried a sting, every chuckle chipped away at the image I had of us. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, what's a little laughter between a husband and wife? But little laughter, repeated often enough, turns into a storm. It built slowly. At family gatherings, she'd tell stories where I was the punchline. At work parties, she'd exaggerate my mistakes just to earn another round of chuckles. People would laugh, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes genuinely entertained. I'd smile too, but each time, my chest felt heavier, as if something precious was slipping from my grasp. I told myself love meant enduring, love meant forgiving, love meant staying even when it hurt. The night that broke me began like any other. It was an anniversary dinner thrown by close friends, meant to be a celebration, a reminder of bonds and history. The room was warm, filled with familiar faces, dim lights casting soft shadows, the air buzzing with conversation. I was proud to walk in with her by my side, proud to call her my wife, proud of everything we had endured together. But pride can shatter in an instant. It happened when the conversation turned casual, when someone asked about a recent project I had been working on. I explained it simply, not wanting to bore anyone. But before I could finish, she jumped in. She told the room about how I had once spilled coffee on the presentation, how I fumbled with technology, how I had been so nervous he could barely speak. She painted me as a fool, the entire story exaggerated to the point where I barely recognized myself in it. And then she laughed, long, loud, and unrestrained. The room followed. Faces blurred into a sea of grins and chuckles, all at my expense. My throat tightened, my hands trembled. I forced a smile, but inside, something cracked. It wasn't just the laughter. It was the betrayal, the choice to humiliate me, to strip me of dignity for entertainment. That night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how we had arrived here. I thought of every moment I had overlooked, every red flag I had ignored. She slept peacefully, as if nothing had happened, while I lay awake drowning in shame. From that point on, everything changed. My trust in her, once unshakable, now felt fragile. Her laughter echoed in my mind during quiet moments, resurfacing like a wound that refused to heal. I began to withdraw, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. At work, I buried myself in tasks, desperate to reclaim a sense of competence. At home, I spoke less, choosing silence over the risk of being mocked again. But withdrawal only made her bolder. She craved attention like air, and when I stopped feeding her with reactions, she sought it elsewhere. Social gatherings became a stage for her to shine brighter while I faded further into the shadows. She would laugh with others, share jokes that hinted at my inadequacies, and I would stand there, invisible except as the subject of ridicule. Yet deep inside, a storm was brewing. A mix of hurt, anger, and betrayal twisted together until it became unbearable. I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep living as the joke in my own marriage. And so, as the gatherings grew louder and her laughter sharper, I made a quiet decision. I would no longer let her laughter define me. But before I could reclaim my dignity, I had to face the brutal truth that love, when poisoned by betrayal, can become indistinguishable from cruelty. That realization was only the beginning. What came next would push me to the edge, tearing apart the life I thought I had built on love, respect, and trust. Days turned into weeks after that anniversary dinner, yet the sound of her laughter lingered in my mind like a haunting melody. I replayed it at odd hours, while brushing my teeth, walking into the office, or staring blankly at the TV in the evenings. It was no longer just a sound, it had become a symbol of everything broken between us. Each time I recalled it, the humiliation stabbed deeper, reminding me that the woman who once promised to stand beside me had chosen to stand above me, using me as her stage. Her behavior escalated. What once felt like occasional jokes became a pattern of cruelty disguised as humor. At a neighborhood barbecue, she shared stories of my clumsiness, even mocking how I folded clothes. Like a lost child. People chuckled politely, unsure whether to laugh or pity me, but she basked in the attention. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, but the weight of ridicule was crushing. Every laugh from others sounded like betrayal. Every smile from her felt like a dagger. I began to observe her differently. Instead of seeing the woman I loved, I saw someone hungry for validation, admiration, the spotlight. And I realized something terrifying. My pain had become her entertainment. The climax of our unraveling came during a large community event, one of those nights where everyone in town gathered to celebrate. I wasn't eager to attend, but she insisted. She dressed beautifully, glowing in a way that drew eyes wherever she went. I followed beside her, quiet, bracing myself for whatever storm might come. The evening began pleasantly enough. Music filled the air, tables brimmed with food, conversations flowed easily. But as the night wore on, and the crowd grew more animated, I felt the familiar tension tightening inside me. I could sense it building, the moment when she would turn the room's laughter toward me. It came suddenly. Someone asked how we first met, a simple question meant to spark nostalgia. I smiled faintly, ready to answer. But she seized the stage. With dramatic flair, she described our first date, twisting it into a comedy of errors, how I spilled soup on myself, how I stumbled over words, how nervous I seemed. The crowd chuckled, leaning in as she exaggerated every detail. Then she added one final blow. Honestly, he's always been this way. Clumsy, nervous, never quite the strong type. And then came the laughter. A roar, a chorus, filling the room. Faces lit with amusement, eyes glancing at me as if I were nothing more than a fool in her story. I stood frozen, my chest burning, my ears ringing with humiliation. I looked at her, my wife, my partner, and saw no remorse in her eyes, only satisfaction. She laughed freely, loudly, basking in the moment, oblivious to the devastation unraveling inside me. That was the breaking point. Something inside me cracked open, and all the years of quiet endurance, all the swallowed pain, all the forced smiles, erupted into clarity. I could not, and would not, continue like this. I didn't shout. I didn't create a scene. I simply walked away. I left the event, left the crowd, left her laughter echoing behind me. For the first time in years, I chose silence not as submission, but as strength. That night, I didn't return home. I drove aimlessly, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my mind replaying every moment of betrayal. And as the hours passed, the truth crystallized. I had been holding on to a love that no longer existed. What she offered me was not love, it was performance. What she gave me was not companionship, it was cruelty dressed as amusement. In the days that followed, I confronted her, not with anger, but with resolve. I told her how her laughter had hollowed me out, how her need for attention had cost us the foundation of trust and respect. She dismissed it at first, waving it off as sensitivity. But I stood firm, and for the first time, she saw that I wasn't bending anymore. The marriage ended soon after. Not in fire and fury, but in the quiet realization that some wounds cut too deep to heal. She moved on quickly, chasing new crowds, new laughter. I moved on slowly, carrying the weight of lessons learned, piecing myself back together with patience and pain. It wasn't easy. Betrayal lingers. The memory of that laughter still returns sometimes, sharp and humiliating. But I also remember the moment I walked away, that silent decision to reclaim my dignity. That choice saved me. And as I rebuilt my life, I came to understand something vital. Betrayal does not always come in grand acts of deceit. Sometimes it comes in small moments, repeated until they break you. Sometimes it comes in laughter,